Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I sat and I read this book called The Library, a Catalogue of Wonders by Stuart, Kells this morning. And this is marketed as a history of the library. As we have on the front here from the Washington Post, excellent, tracks the history of that greatest of all cultural institutions. Now, having read this, I have a little bit of a beef with that. I wouldn't exactly call this a proper history. Not that the author doesn't bring to light historical facts and bits and pieces about the history of libraries, but it's not what I would call a complete history, and the book itself is a little bit haphazard. There are long chapters, there are short chapters, there are sort of random bits thrown in here and there. It's just a very haphazardly constructed book, and it doesn't give what I would consider a complete history of the library. We begin with a chapter on oral traditions, which the author considers an early version of the library. So of course it wasn't a physical library, but people's minds collectively were a library. And then we have some history on the first written down texts. We have a chapter on the Library of Alexandria and how it may or may not have met its destruction. We have, all of a sudden after that, a chapter on books in bed. So the author says, books will sleep with you. And he goes on to talk about a 17th century Belgian bibliophile who assembled, here it says, a collection of 32,000 volumes, and his living space was so full that he literally was sleeping and living on top of books. We have some bits of history about the Dark Ages, about books in monasteries, about the first paper mills in Europe, about mean-spirited collectors who were collecting books that they didn't really want, if only to keep other people from having them. We have a section on the Vatican's library. The author talks about several prominent old libraries in Europe. There is a section on library Fauna, that's what the chapter is called, Library Fauna, which is about the different insects and molds and problems that can destroy books. There is a section on book wheels and machines that help you read books. There is a section on fires, on ways that different books, collections of books have been destroyed. So there's lots of interesting stuff in here. There's lots of interesting facts, lots of little nuggets that I had never heard of. But the problem is Kells doesn't do more than brush the surface of these, and I don't particularly see a logical order to the way the book is set out, to the way this information is presented. We do start sort of with a linear history, but then there's just bits and pieces thrown in here about someone who thought old books tasted good, about someone who stole books. And there's some sections that are just really short, a couple, and I was sort of like, what is this? And why is this here? Death, for instance. There's a random section on death. It's a page and a half about people who have been killed in bookshelves. So we just have this random bit about in 1374, at the age of 69, Petrarch died in his own library. His body was discovered the following morning, his head resting on an open codex, the life of Caesar. So just a couple of different people who have died in libraries. I guess they are prominent people. There is a complete section on Tolkien and Middle Earth for some reason. That, okay, it's great that books and libraries are central to Tolkien's writing, but what does that have to do with the rest of the content of this book? So I did enjoy reading it, but as I said, it was a little haphazard. There's a section on delicacies about tasting books. I'll leave that to your imagination. But it wasn't sort of the complete history of the library that I was expecting, sort of based on how it's marketed, tracks the history of libraries. So yeah, read that. Not something I would highly recommend, but if you're looking for something to set you on the track of learning more about libraries and about books, perhaps this is it. It's not solely dedicated to libraries. It was more a mishmash of libraries, the book as a physical object, and the eccentricities of private collectors. But if you're looking for something on the lighter side to set you on the path for more reading, perhaps this is what you want to look at. There are definitely little nuggets that I think I want to read more about, but it's not the coherent history of the library that I was expecting. If you read this one, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And if not, let me know what your favorite books about books are, because, reading this sort of fed that itch in me to start reading more books about books again.